They say it takes a village to raise a child, because children need a lot of different people to look out for them. Families can use all the help they can get. After all, no parent is perfect. That's why McCoy leads the Early Intervention and Prevention Initiative. We want to showcase all of the excellent programs in our city that help families learn and grow together. Because when we learn and grow together, we make our village a better place to live. Thank you for tuning in. We hope you enjoy this episode of Our Kids, Our Families, Our Communities.
Hello, you're watching Our Kids, Our Families, Our Communities. My name is Mitzi Wilson. I'm the Early Intervention and Prevention Initiatives Director. This show is brought to you to provide information and resources about issues impacting youth in our community. Today's focus is going to be on art therapy. And so to begin, I'd like to introduce you to our guest. We have Juliet King and we have Jessica Bisher. They are both art therapists and work within the field, but I'd like the both of you to take some time to introduce yourself and to share a little bit about the work that you do. So we can begin with you, Juliet.
Thank you. I'm the director of the Graduate Art Therapy Program at Herron School of Art and Design at IUPUI, and I also am an adjunct assistant professor in the Department of Neurology at the Indiana University School of Medicine. So I moved here about 5 years ago to develop the Graduate Art Therapy Program here in Indiana. It's the second one in the state and the first one of its kind, in that it's a 60-credit full-time master's program that's in residence, where our students are required to complete the curriculum requirements that specialize obviously in art therapy education, and then also 1,000 hours of clinical internship throughout the city and surrounding communities. And we are preparing students with their registration as an art therapist and also their license as a mental health counselor.
Wow, thank you very much. And Jessica?
Well, I own Art of the Soul Studio. I opened it in 2010 after working for a period of time in psychiatric hospitals, some managed healthcare settings. And the idea behind Art of the Soul is that it was an open studio project that I modeled after a program out of Chicago that was open in the mid-90s. And so the basis for the first 3 years was that people could come in off the street and make art and do it in a therapeutic way without judgment and free expression. And then after about 3 years, there were more people, more art therapists coming forward with interest to partner, and so we moved into a more therapeutic healing space on the northeast side of Indy, where we do private practice and workshops, and we partner with community organizations to offer art therapy services.
Thank you. Yeah. And so for those that are watching that are kind of new to this concept, so what is art therapy?
So art therapy is a medical and healthcare profession that requires a master's degree in art therapy to practice. And so what art therapists do is they work with people to help them express themselves and whatever issues they might be working through with both verbal and nonverbal techniques. And so art therapists are trained in areas of creativity, theory, and expression, in symbolic understanding and nonverbal expression, in the use of different materials and methods to elicit self-expression and help people understand what's happening inside of themselves. Oftentimes, we need ways in addition to words to help us tell what's going on. It's a way of talking without telling. Mm-hmm. For example, when you make a piece of art, it's representative of you. And when you use different materials and methods to do that, then you tap into different parts of yourself that you can't really get to with words. And so we are trained as both verbal and nonverbal psychotherapists that provide clinical art therapy intervention. Do you want to add to that?
No, I think that was beautiful.
Is that all right? Okay.
And so you did kind of highlight just the clinical component of it.
Yeah.
So it's different than, a parent that has their child in an art program at school. This is, specifically built to have that clinical component.
So we are psychotherapists, and I think a really good way of trying to understand and describe what art therapy is, when we're dealing with ambiguous topics like the psyche, right? Or like art making or expression. These are hard things to quantify and to empiricize, right? And so it's difficult to always put numbers to exactly how we feel and think. So I always like to say that art therapy exists on a continuum, and at one end of the continuum you have the profession of art therapy, where we work with people to identify behavioral symptoms and goals and work towards reducing whatever stressors are at play. And then at the other end of the continuum you have therapeutic arts experiences, like a cello player on a cancer unit who plays music and people feel better, or an artist in residency who paints work on the walls and people feel a different way when they're walking down the hall as opposed to if the walls were gray. Okay, so art is everywhere and therapeutic experiences are everywhere, but art therapy is a specific profession that requires a different kind of training and a more in-depth training.
Thank you. And so how would a parent or caregiver identify if maybe their child should have art therapy?
I can take that. So a lot of our referrals come from the schools, guidance counselors, sometimes art teachers. So a parent might hear from their school first. If it's something that the parent is noticing at home, that the child is a little bit extra stressed or maybe anxious coming to school, maybe some decline in grades or some social situations, and they're not quite able to be verbal about it, or maybe that it's just irritability that they have at home, those would be good indicators that art therapy might be of benefit to them, because going to a therapist, like a verbal therapist, the child is going to talk about things that are bothering them and use maybe cognitive behavioral therapy, which is great. But art therapy is sort of a backdoor into the unconscious, and I always say it's supportive and gentle, and it's empowering as well for the child.
So what are some of the things that a parent could expect to happen if their child were in art therapy? Like what would you engage the child in?
I'll take that. So it depends on what some of the goals are that the parent and the child come in with. Say anger management issues, we would first, I like to use a theory that we call the expressive therapy continuum that a lot of art therapists learn in graduate school. And if the child's not able to sit still due to having some pent-up aggression or anger issues, say about a social situation, we would go to using probably clay first, because it's that kinesthetic and sensory response. And through that, then there would more than likely be some verbal exchange about what's going on, and then eventually we can move into where there's some symbolic expression coming out of the clay that's maybe a symbol of their rage.
So for example, a child might make a lion and act through the lion. And in the process of making the lion, they might be able to identify different aspects of the lion that are representative of themselves. And so the art therapist is trained to use these different materials to know how and when to intervene. I think what's really important for parents to understand, like we all have a hard time with words, no matter how old you are, right? You get into a fight with your boyfriend or girlfriend and you're like, I know I'm angry, but I just don't know how to say it. Well, children have even more of a difficult time because their brains aren't formed yet, right? And a lot of times children aren't really sure of what it is that they are experiencing. And so oftentimes I think that art therapy is crucial when doing psychotherapy with children, and especially if you include the aspects of trauma and what we understand about trauma and how trauma is housed in our bodies. It's not housed in the front part of our brains where we have this nice, easy way of describing things. Oftentimes trauma is held in our unconscious, as Jess had mentioned, and it's in places that we need sensory-based ways of maneuvering and tapping into in order to not become overwhelmed, in order to slowly integrate these feelings and experiences, and in order to even understand what it is that's happening to us. And so first and foremost, a parent can expect to have their child come to an art therapist, and like any psychotherapy, the most important part is the relationship that's established. And oftentimes that might take time, right? Especially if a child has been traumatized or has been through a lot in their lives. And so most importantly, we create a safe space for a child to be able to explore that. And no therapy can really take place with a child unless the parent is involved or identified caretaker, right? And that's really important too. So oftentimes we'll want to work individually with the children and then bring the parents into work as well.
Okay. And you touched on a really important conversation that's happening within the youth service field is really that conversation around trauma-informed care. And you talked a little bit about it, but really how is that the work of art therapy helping to really either create a service that really works with trauma and uses the trauma-informed approach?
So I think expanding a little bit upon what Jess and I have already said, the more that we learn about trauma and its effect on our bodies, our minds, and our psyches, the more that we realize we need myriad ways of helping to understand and express ourselves. I think we have to be very careful because a lot of times people aren't aware of the intricacies that are involved and we could call it defensive functioning that's involved when a person endures trauma, no matter what age. And we are also not aware of the importance of objectivity and being able to get some distance from what it is that we are experiencing in order to even try to understand it. Because the nature of trauma and traumatic memory lends itself to an overtaxing of a physiological system. Your body gets taxed, your cortisol goes up, you're stressed. Your limbic system is running amok, right? Because your body's trying to figure out how to manage the emotions that aren't conscious yet. And so we have got to form pathways and building blocks to self-expression, and we must rely on these creative interventions in order to do that. And in doing so, we create new pathways and we make it easier to express because we live in a verbal society. Ultimately, we want to be able to talk about our experience and process and integrate it, but it takes some time to get there.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you. And so you've, shared kind of, what the practice of art therapy is about. So for a parent that may be listening that would like their child to have art therapy, how do they connect?
So Art of the Soul sees people for private practice. They can contact our website. It's artofthesoulstudio.com. And we have a few art therapists that are paneled with insurance. So they would contact them directly on our About Us page, or a lot of our therapists work on a sliding fee scale. So we work within the range of what the parent can afford.
Okay.
There's other organizations within the city, community-based mental health organizations that offer art therapy for Medicaid services as well.
There's also the Indiana Art Therapy Association, and so you can find the Indiata, as it's called, online. And if you write to the Indiana Art Therapy Association and let them know that you're looking for services, then we'll do whatever we can to help. You can contact the Graduate Art Therapy programs. I can really only speak for my own, but if you email me, kingjul@iupui.edu, or just Google Heron Art Therapy, you'll see my name and my email will come up, and you can email me and let me know that you're interested in services, and we'll do the best that we can to get you hooked up.
And so for a child that's been through art therapy, like what are some of the benefits that you've seen or kind of the improvements that have come out of the work?
Well, some of the things that I've seen is more ability to connect with their parents, improved grades, just because they're not as anxious to go to school, say, improved social interactions, more increased peer activity, whether it's sports or academic kind of things, extracurriculars.
More attention and focus, just engaging in the different types of artistic expression or interventions that are applied. Attention, focus, concentration are improved. There's a bilateral process that occurs when one is making art, and we're doing all kinds of exciting research now in the Department of Neurology to look at brain mapping and what actually happens when we make art. And what we know is that art is all over the brain. So when people suffer from trauma or difficult life circumstances or physical and mental illness, you can imagine it as the brain almost becomes fragmented and becomes stiffer almost, and it's harder to communicate. And so things like creativity, music, dance help to have different parts of the brain connect and again build new neural pathways. And so just engaging in the art process itself is healthy and life enhancing. And it also provides a lot more energy. You see people that come in and they're tired and they're depleted and maybe they're on medication, they got all kinds of stuff going on. And you engage in an art therapy session and they have more energy and they have more interest and intent. And I think long term it's really excited to see people become more integrated and be able to live more wholly within themselves and then as part of the greater society.
And you both have really shared very openly, information about mental health. But what about a family that, doesn't want to have the conversation or is worried about what it means to connect their child to a therapist? How do you work to overcome some of those barriers?
Well, let's just call it coming to the art place with Juliet then, or with jazz, right? And I think that we have a long way to go in our society to get beyond stigma. Again, those ambiguous concepts like mental illness are difficult to define, and they're pretty significant and they're pretty severe. So as life unfolds, we learn more and more about how we're affected by mental illness and the stigma that surrounds it. But I think that we all have a responsibility to be able to take a step in and start to explore what it is that we need to do to feel more complete. And so by being maybe it's a really courageous endeavor to get into therapy. It takes a lot of courage, but something that people need to know is that you don't get hit over the head with this is what therapy is and you're in therapy now, and it's not like that. If you're with a good therapist. I'm blathering on. Do you have anything to add to that?
I've had parents say, can we just call these art lessons? And so we'll start out that way, and then probably 6 sessions in, the child says, gosh, we're talking a lot about feelings. And so without calling it therapy, I'll explain what therapy is. And eventually we just move into it calling it art therapy.
So we can call it art lessons with the clients and the parents and the children, but we're not calling it art lessons with the stakeholders.
Absolutely not,
or
no.
the healthcare professionals or get my point.
Right.
And kind of what you're describing, though, that it's kind of a great way to kind of fill that gap for a parent that might be a little bit nervous about, taking their child to a quote-unquote therapist and how their child would receive that. It's an option for them to kind of connect their child to support that is therapeutic, but maybe without as much anxiety around that. Mm-hmm. And so I think something that you both have shared is that you've done a lot of outreach around art therapy in the community and work with various organizations. Can you share a little bit more about that work?
Do you want to?
So, I feel like I've stood on a platform for a long time now of helping to advocate for the profession of art therapy, and most importantly to educate what art therapy is and what it's not. Again, back to that therapeutic arts art therapy continuum. And so we've built, when I first moved here, there were only 4 places that we could place our students for internships, and now we have over 30. And so what I have been in the process of doing is an awful lot of outreach and talks within the community, within the hospital systems, healthcare facilities, both private, nonprofit, all different types of facilities, to try to help people understand how art therapy may be of benefit to their existing treatment team. Or perhaps they want to have a new treatment team that includes art therapy, or perhaps they want to hire an art therapist, or at least have an art therapy intern to complement what's already in existence. And I choose to do that on the foundations of science, and realizing that neuroscience affords art therapists to explain with more evidence what we've always intuited, that the art making process is a brain-based process, and the materials and methods that we use foster and facilitate different areas of our brain and our psyche. And that all takes place within the context of the therapeutic relationship. And the more that we learn about the brain, the more that we realize how important these components are and how science can support what it is that we do.
And Jessica, you had talked a little bit about the Indiana Art Therapy Association. Mm-hmm. Can you share more about the work that they do?
Well, we do a lot of educating and advocating for art therapy in the community. One of the things that I think we're most passionate about is moving forward with something along the lines of art therapy title protection or licensure of some sort. Do you want to add anything about that?
So there are 5 states that have a license of art therapy in America, and we are not one of them. And we have about 35 art therapists in our state. And so as that number grows, we're plugging away to try to garner more support in addition to our advocacy to walk towards licensure and to join the existing boards for the behavioral health and human services. And so again, as I mentioned earlier, we have our license as mental health counselors in Indiana and in most states as professional counselors. But we are slowly working towards probably licensure and then getting on the Medicaid waiver, and so our services can be reimbursable.
Thank you. Well, is there anything else that you would like for our families that are watching to know about art therapy that they might not have known?
I want us to work together. We need, it takes a village, right? We need all kinds of ways to intervene with people and to support people. And so I think that the professions, the social workers, the counselors, the art therapists, the music therapists, we need to respect the integrity of one another's profession, and then we need to support one another with our strengths. We need to be able to support the families for what it is that they need. If people are anxious about coming into therapy, we meet people where they are at. Let's talk about being anxious. Take the step forward, be able to make the call, and then see where it takes you.
That's good advice. Thank you. Jessica, did you have anything that you would like to share?
Well, I'm excited for 2017 and beyond with my own organization. We're continuing to grow community partnerships and corporate events for art therapy, and just getting the advocacy for art therapy out there and gaining new ground and adding more art therapists to Indiana.
And so our families that have a young person that they would like to receive art therapy, again, I want to just repeat how they would connect into a program to make sure they have that information. So how do they connect to you?
For Art of the Soul, you can go to our website. It's artofthesoulstudio.com, and we have an events tab that you can pull up our calendar and look at all our events on there as well. And our Facebook page as well. It's Art of the Soul Studio.
Thank you.
Indiana Art Therapy Association can be found on the website. You can always Google Heron Art Therapy. My name's Juliette King, and you can email me, and we'll do whatever we can to set you up.
Well, thank you very much, Jessica and Juliette, for sharing with us about art therapy. That will wrap up our show for today. I thank you very much for watching. If you would like to find this show, you can access it on McCoy's website, which is mccouth.org. You can also find our Facebook page as well as our YouTube channel and other social media connects through our website. We hope you watch again, and thank you.